Rain slammed against the Carter family windows while silence poisoned the dinner table. Ethan Carter sat quietly, staring at the cold mashed potatoes on his plate, while his father's angry voice filled the room like thunder. His younger brother Tyler laughed at something on his phone while his mother kept her eyes lowered, too afraid to speak. "You're 23 years old," Richard Carter snapped, tossing a crumpled bill onto the table. "And this is all you contribute? Pathetic." Ethan swallowed hard. He had worked double shifts all week at a warehouse job, but no matter what he did, it was never enough for his father. "I'm trying," Ethan said softly. Richard slammed his fist on the table so hard the silverware jumped. Trying doesn't pay bills. Trying doesn't make a man." The words stabbed deeper than Ethan wanted to admit. Ever since childhood, his father had treated him like a disappointment. Tyler was the athletic golden son. Ethan was the quiet mistake who preferred books, discipline, and dreams nobody cared about, especially one dream: the military. Ethan had hidden military brochures under his mattress since he was 16. Every time he imagined serving his country, he also imagined hearing his father finally say the words he had waited his whole life to hear: "I'm proud of you." But that moment never came. 2 months earlier, Ethan secretly met with a military recruiter who told him he had potential. Leadership scores, sharp instincts, strong physical endurance. For the first time in years, Ethan had felt hope. Then Richard found the paperwork. A soldier, his father had laughed cruelly that night. You'd cry your way through boot camp. The memory still burned. Now the storm outside grew louder while tension suffocated the room. Richard leaned back in his chair, eyes cold as stone. "I'm tired of carrying you." Ethan looked up slowly. "I pay rent. You pay scraps. I do everything I can." "No," Richard growled. "You do the bare minimum because you're weak." That word again, weak. Ethan's hands tightened beneath the table. Years of insults flashed through his mind. Birthdays forgotten, achievements ignored, every failure magnified. He remembered being 13 years old after losing a football game and hearing his father whisper to another parent, "Tyler got my strength, Ethan got nothing." The pain never left. "I'm not weak," Ethan finally said. The room froze. Richard stared at him in disbelief before laughing bitterly. "You can't even look people in the eye when you talk. That doesn't make me weak." "Oh, really?" Richard stood up. "Then prove it. Prove you're not the useless burden everyone sees." Ethan rose slowly from his chair, heart pounding. His mother looked terrified. "Richard, stop." "No." Richard shouted, "I'm done pretending this boy is ever going to become something. Boy. Not son, boy." The word shattered something inside Ethan. For years he had swallowed every insult, every humiliation, every cruel comparison. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt final. "I never asked you to carry me," Ethan said quietly. Richard stepped closer, rage burning in his eyes. "Then get out." Ethan blinked. "What? You heard me." Richard pointed toward the front door. "Get out and stay out." Tyler stopped smiling. Their mother gasped softly. "Richard, please, I mean it," he barked. Maybe the world can teach him what failure feels like. Ethan felt like the air had vanished from the room. Part of him expected his father to calm down, to take the words back, but Richard only stared at him with cold disappointment, as if he truly wanted him gone. Slowly, Ethan nodded. Without another word, he walked upstairs to his tiny bedroom. His hands shook as he grabbed an old duffel bag and stuffed clothes inside. At the bottom drawer sat the folded military recommendation letter he had hidden for months. He stared at it for a long moment, then carefully placed it into the bag. When Ethan came back downstairs, his mother's eyes were filled with tears. "Ethan," she whispered. He forced a weak smile. "It's okay, Mom." But it wasn't. Richard opened the front door as rain exploded through the night air. "Go," he said coldly. Ethan stepped outside carrying nothing but a bag, shattered pride, and years of pain. Behind him the door slammed shut, and for the first time in his life, Ethan realized he truly had nobody to go home to. The bus station smelled like wet concrete, cheap coffee, and exhaustion. Ethan Carter sat alone on a hard plastic bench at 3 in the morning, his duffel bag resting beside his boots. Outside, rainwater slid down the glass windows, while strangers hurried through the terminal without noticing him. 2 nights ago, he had a home. Now he had nothing except a military recommendation letter folded carefully inside his jacket pocket. He pulled it out again, staring at the recruiter's signature at the bottom. "You've got potential, Ethan. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Those words echoed in his head constantly, because nobody in his life had ever spoken to him that way before, especially not his father. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Fort Lincoln Training Base. Massive fences surrounded the facility while military trucks rolled across the grounds. Groups of recruits marched through the yard with sharp precision. For a moment, fear crawled into his chest. What if his father was right? What if he really was too weak? A tall drill sergeant stepped in front of him before he could think further. "You Ethan Carter?" "Yes, sir." The sergeant looked him up and down. "You look nervous." Ethan straightened immediately. "Just focused, sir." The sergeant smirked slightly. "Good answer. You'll need focus here." Training began immediately. The first week nearly destroyed him. Recruits were pushed beyond their limits from sunrise until midnight. Endless running, obstacle courses, combat drills, sleep deprivation, ice-cold showers. Blisters covered Ethan's feet while pain tore through every muscle in his body. Some recruits quit within days. Others mocked Ethan constantly. "Pretty boy's gonna cry." One recruit laughed during training. Another shook his head. Guy looked scared of his own shadow. Ethan ignored them. Years of surviving his father's insults had taught him how to stay silent. But silence didn't make the pain disappear. Every night, lying awake in the barracks, Ethan replayed the moment his father screamed at him. "Get out and stay out." The words became fuel. Every extra push-up, every sprint, every painful mile. He refused to fail. One afternoon, recruits were ordered to complete an emergency rescue simulation across rough terrain. Smoke filled the training field while instructors shouted orders through loudspeakers. "Move, move, move." Ethan's squad raced through mud and broken obstacles carrying heavy equipment packs. Halfway through the course, an explosion simulator detonated nearby, startling everyone. One recruit lost his footing and crashed hard into a concrete barrier. "My leg!" The recruit screamed. The squad hesitated. The timer continued running. If they stopped, the team would fail. "Leave him," someone shouted, but Ethan froze. The injured recruit clutched his ankle in agony, while others kept moving ahead. For a split second, Ethan remembered being 16 years old after collapsing during a football game. His father had looked at him with disgust instead of concern. "Get up. Stop embarrassing yourself." That memory hit like lightning. Without hesitation, Ethan dropped his gear and rushed back toward the injured recruit. "I've got you," he said firmly. "You'll fail the exercise." The recruit gasped. "I don't care." Ethan lifted the heavier man onto his shoulders and forced himself forward through the smoke and mud. Every step burned through his legs like fire. His breathing became ragged, but he refused to stop. Across the field, several high-ranking officers watched the simulation closely. One of them was General Marcus Hale, a decorated war hero, and he was staring directly at Ethan. "Interesting," the general murmured. Minutes later, Ethan crossed the finish line carrying the injured recruit while collapsing to one knee from exhaustion. The drill instructors looked stunned. "You sacrificed your completion time." One barked. "Yes, sir." Ethan breathed heavily. "Why?" Ethan looked at the injured recruit beside him. "Because leaving him behind wasn't an option." Silence followed. General Hale slowly stepped forward. Even the drill sergeants straightened immediately. The general's sharp eyes studied Ethan carefully. "What's your name, son?" "Recruit Ethan Carter, sir." "You understand most recruits chose themselves over teamwork today." "Yes, sir, but not you." Ethan hesitated. "People deserve better than being abandoned, sir." The general's expression shifted slightly, almost like he understood something deeper behind those words. Then he nodded once. "Well done, Carter." As the general walked away, Ethan stood frozen. For the first time in his life, someone important had looked at him with respect instead of disappointment. 2 weeks after being thrown out of his home, Ethan Carter stepped off a military transport bus wearing a freshly pressed uniform. The small town of Millbrook looked exactly the same as when he left it: quiet streets, old brick stores, and people who loved gossip more than truth. Yet Ethan felt different walking through it now, stronger, sharper, like the broken version of himself had been left somewhere behind at Fort Lincoln. Still, fear lingered deep inside him, because no matter how far he traveled, part of him was still the son his father rejected. The town square buzzed with excitement that afternoon. American flags lined the sidewalks while a temporary stage stood in front of City Hall. Local reporters moved through the crowd preparing cameras for a military recognition ceremony, honoring outstanding recruits from nearby training programs. Ethan never expected to be invited, especially not after only 2 weeks, but General Marcus Hale had personally requested his attendance after the rescue simulation incident spread through the base. Ethan still didn't fully understand why. "You showed character under pressure," the general had told him earlier that week. That matters more than talent. Now Ethan adjusted his sleeves nervously while standing beside several decorated soldiers near the stage. Then he saw them, his family. His mother stood near the back of the crowd wearing a worried expression. Tyler stood beside her awkwardly with his hands in his pockets, and directly in front of them stood Richard Carter, Ethan's father. The moment their eyes met, Ethan's chest tightened painfully. Richard looked almost annoyed to see him alive. "Well," his father said as he approached slowly, "look who came crawling back." Ethan stayed silent. Richard smirked while glancing at the uniform. "So they gave you a costume. That doesn't make you a soldier." Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, what?" Richard snapped. "I'm telling the truth." Ethan felt old emotions rising again, humiliation, anger, sadness. For years, his father's voice controlled how he saw himself, but something was different now. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel small standing in front of him. "I didn't come back for your approval," Ethan said calmly. Richard laughed coldly. "Good, because you'll never get it." His mother looked heartbroken. "Richard, please stop." Before another word could be spoken, loud applause erupted near the stage. A military announcer stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome General Marcus Hale." The crowd instantly stood straighter as the decorated general walked onto the stage in full uniform. Medals gleamed across his chest while cameras flashed around him. Richard folded his arms dismissively. "Big show," then the announcer continued. "Today, we recognize uncommon courage shown during advanced military emergency simulations. One recruit demonstrated extraordinary selflessness by risking his own success to save another trainee." Ethan froze. The general stepped toward the microphone. "Most people reveal their true character when they gain power," he said firmly. "But real heroes reveal themselves when sacrifice becomes necessary." The crowd listened silently. General Hale looked directly toward Ethan. "Recruit Ethan Carter, front and center." Gasps spread through the square. Richard's confident expression vanished instantly. Ethan walked forward slowly, heart hammering against his ribs. The general faced the crowd proudly. While others chose personal achievement, this young man chose loyalty, courage, and honor. Those values cannot be taught. They come from character. Ethan could barely breathe. Cameras turned toward him. The same town that once ignored him was now staring in complete silence. Then came the moment nobody expected. General Hale took one step back and raised a formal military salute directly toward Ethan. The entire square erupted into applause. Ethan stood frozen in shock as soldiers, reporters, and strangers clapped loudly around him. His mother burst into tears. Tyler looked stunned, but Richard Carter looked destroyed. For the first time in Ethan's life, his father had no cruel words left to say, because standing before him was no longer the weak son he mocked. This was a man respected by soldiers, a man publicly honored by a U.S. general. As Ethan slowly returned the salute, he looked toward his father one final time. Not with hatred, not with revenge, but with quiet strength, and somehow that hurt Richard far more than anger ever could. The applause in the town square seemed endless. Ethan Carter stood beside General Marcus Hale while cameras flashed from every direction. Reporters crowded near the stage, shouting questions over one another as townspeople whispered in disbelief. Just 2 weeks earlier, Ethan had walked these same streets feeling unwanted. Now the entire town looked at him like he mattered. But strangely, victory didn't feel the way he imagined it would. He thought proving his father wrong would fill the empty places inside him. Instead, he mostly felt tired. General Hale placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You handled yourself well today. Thank you, sir, you know." The general said quietly. Most people would have used this moment to embarrass the man who hurt them. Ethan glanced toward the crowd where Richard still stood frozen near the back. "I wanted to once," Ethan admitted softly. General Hale nodded like he understood completely. Pain can turn people cruel if they let it. Before Ethan could respond, a female reporter hurried toward them with a microphone. "Recruit Carter," she called. "One question, please." General Hale stepped aside. The reporter smiled politely. "People here witnessed your father insult you publicly before the ceremony. How does it feel proving him wrong today?" The crowd went silent again. Even Richard looked up slowly. Ethan could feel years of pain pressing against his chest. Every insult, every moment of rejection, every cruel comparison to Tyler. This was the perfect opportunity for revenge. One sentence could humiliate his father in front of everyone. Part of Ethan wanted that, but another part remembered something deeper. He remembered sleeping alone at the bus station. He remembered the fear during training. He remembered how badly rejection hurt. And he realized something important. He didn't want to become a man who enjoyed breaking people. So Ethan looked calmly at the reporter and answered softly, "Pain can destroy a person or build one." The crowd listened carefully. "My father's words hurt me," Ethan continued honestly. "But they also pushed me to discover strength I didn't know I had. Some people become bitter after rejection. I decided to become better instead." The square erupted into applause again. But this time, Richard lowered his head, because Ethan had just shown more maturity, dignity, and strength than he ever had. Hours later, the ceremony ended and crowds slowly disappeared into the evening streets. Soldiers packed equipment while reporters left with their stories. Ethan stood alone near the empty stage, staring at the sunset, when he heard footsteps behind him. Richard Carter. For a moment neither spoke. The silence felt uncomfortable, heavy with years of damage. Finally, Richard cleared his throat awkwardly. "When your mother told me you joined training," he paused, "I didn't think you'd last 2 days." Ethan gave a faint smile. "I know." Richard looked down at the ground like the words physically hurt him to say. "When that general saluted you," his father whispered, "I realized I never really saw you." Ethan stayed quiet. His father's eyes looked older now, smaller somehow. "I spent so many years trying to make you tough," Richard admitted. "But all I really did was push you away." For years Ethan dreamed about hearing an apology. Now that it finally came, it didn't magically erase the scars. "But it mattered. I used to think I needed your approval to become someone," Ethan said calmly. "I don't anymore." Richard nodded slowly, shame filling his face. "You deserved better from me." The words hit Ethan harder than he expected, not because they fixed everything, but because they were true. A long silence passed between them before Richard spoke again. "Can you forgive me?" Ethan looked toward the fading sunset, thinking carefully. Then he answered honestly, "Maybe someday completely, but healing takes time." Richard's eyes watered slightly as he nodded. "That's fair." Ethan picked up his duffel bag and stepped away from the stage. For years he thought revenge meant making people suffer the way they made you suffer. But now he understood the truth. Real revenge was succeeding without hatred, growing without cruelty, becoming strong without losing kindness. As Ethan walked down the street in uniform, people smiled at him with admiration. But for the first time in his life, he didn't need anyone's approval to know his worth.